So it's Grandparents' Day, and one of a really powerful scripture that came to mind as I was thinking about this day that I think is really relevant, not just because there's grandparents in the room, but also because of what's going on in the world around us, is something that's found in 1 Timothy chapter 1, where Paul is writing to this young minister, Timothy. And he says, starting in verse 5, he says, "When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, I am persuaded that it's in you as well. Wherefore I put you in remembrance that if you stir up the gift of God, which was put in thee by the putting of my hands, put on by my hands, for God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Be thou not therefore not ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but be a partaker of the afflictions of the gospel according to the power of God." A couple things in that. Paul's talking to this young person, and he says, I see in you some things that I've seen before. The faith that I see in you, I first saw it in your grandmother and in your mother. And don't be concerned about all the stuff that's going on around you right now. I think if we just looked at our phones or watched TV or look at Twitter or anything else, we are inundated with reasons to be in fear. Aren't we? Can we afford this? Will this still be around? Are we going to war? Look what just happened here. What's going on there? Anxiety, depression, mental health issues are skyrocketing in our community. But what does the Word of God say? God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And how is that connected to Grandparents' Day? Because remember what Paul says. He says, God has been faithful to your grandmother. See the faith that she's shown through her life? God has been faithful to your mother. Do you see the testimony of how God has been faithful in her life? If God was faithful to them and saw them through what they went through, he will also be faithful to you, because he is a faithful God. Great is his faithfulness. My grandmother, Kay Collins, she loved Brentwood Academy. One of my favorite memories is she was at our home at one of the graduations for one of her great-grandchildren. And one day she was sitting in our sunroom, and she just started crying. And I'm like, Grandma, are you okay? What, is something wrong? What happened? She said, baby, you just don't understand. Never thought that my kids or my grandkids or my great-grandkids would be able to go to a school like this and get an education like this. See, Grandma Kay was born in the 1920s. In the 1920s in northern Florida, there weren't a whole lot of educational opportunities. In fact, there was this sharecropping where she would have to not go to school every day because there are certain days she would have to help her dad in the fields. So she had an emphasis on education. She was going to make sure whatever sacrifice needed to be made, her children and her family were going to get an education. So she poured that into my mother, Edna. And she ended up going to college and making education an opportunity where we could see God moving and creating opportunities that once were a dream. In her last years, the things that comfort us the most, I remember her saying, I can go to sleep because I've seen the promises of God manifest. The things that were once a dream, I see it in my family. So for me, when I go through stuff, I realize I'm not going through what she went through. I'm not going through the civil rights movement and things that my mom had to go through. We're in a whole different era. Yes, are there challenges? Yes. But God is faithful. I cannot be consumed with fear. And I can trust that if God has been faithful to my grandmother, and he's been faithful to my mother, he'll be faithful to me. I encourage all of us today, share something about your story with your children or grandchildren. Allow this to be an opportunity for us not to see the Word of God as just a book, but this is an expression of a living God that is working in the hearts and lives of real people each and every day. I'm sure if we take a moment, we can think of something that we can share that can encourage our children. Amen? Can we agree to that challenge today? That we can share something about the goodness of God? Well, with that, I'm excited about probably the reason why many of you are here, which is to hear our special guest. Stephen Curtis Chapman is not only an amazing artist, but has been a friend to Brentwood Academy for many years. And in a career that has spanned more than 3 decades, he is the most awarded artist in Christian music history, with 59 Gospel Music Association Dove Awards, 5 Grammy Awards, an American Music Award, and 49 #1 singles. He has sold more than 11 million albums, with 10 certified gold or platinum albums to his credit. As a vocal supporter of adoption, and along with his wife, Mary Beth, they founded Show Hope in 2003, which is a nonprofit organization that helps restore the hope of a family to orphans. And his new album, Still, is filled with an entirely fresh, life-giving songs for the masses. His album includes the title track, Don't Lose Heart, I'm Alive, and many more. So please, let's welcome to the stage our very special guest today, Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. And I was first invited to come and speak this morning, and I kind of panicked and said, no, thanks, because I'm not a speaker. And I said, can I sing? Can I bring my guitar? As long as I can hide behind that, I feel a little more. Now, people laugh when I say that, because especially my wife. In fact, a few years ago, I wrote an album called Speechless, and I told my wife I'd written a song called Speechless, and she laughed out loud. She literally, my wife said, there is never a moment in your life I've ever known you to be speechless. You have lots of things to say about, too much to say about most things. So she kind of chuckles, and those who know me well know that, the fact that I would panic a little bit when asked to speak would be kind of a funny thing. But I am really, when I consider what you've already heard, the great truths and the great stories, and I loved just the reference of story even this morning from Freddie, just because it is story that God has revealed himself in my life, and even what you've been hearing and experiencing this week. It's been the stories that God is telling, the epic tales, and to be with you young people, all of you young people. I thought this was Grandparents' Day, and I walked in and said, I don't see any grandparents here. These are all very young people. That's a fun thing that happens as you get a little older, because I, too, am now a grandparent. And I'm like, man, we're looking good. We're crushing it, grandparents. Come on, look at us. We got it going on. So you look great. And And it really is, though, exciting to be with you and to get to hear the stories already, and then just to get to remind you maybe today of God's faithfulness. Again, just perfect words for what I felt like as I prayed about what I could encourage you with in my little bit of time with you. Just the faithfulness of God in our stories, in all of the chapters of our stories, the good ones, the really hard ones. But as I said, I do a whole lot better if I can just at least play one song to kind of get the jitters out or whatever a little bit. And as I thought about it, I thought this one kind of is a good way to start my little bit of time with you, because this is a song about journey, and mine in particular, but maybe some of you even know this one. Some of you grandparents might recognize this one from back a few years ago. I like to refer to it as the mullet years, if you know what I'm talking about. Some of you? Okay. I started out this morning in the usual way, chasing thoughts inside my head of all I had to do today. Another time around the circle, try to make it better than that. I opened up the Bible and I read about you and me. Said we'd all been prisoners, and God's grace had set us all free. Somewhere between the pages, it hit me like a lightning bolt. I saw a big frontier in front of me, and I heard somebody say, let's go, saddle up yours, yeah. We got a trail to blaze through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. Let's follow our leader into the glorious unknown. This is a life like no other. Whoa, this is a great adventure. So come on, get ready for the ride of your life. Gonna leave long-faced religion in a cloud of dust behind, and discover all the new horizons waiting to be explored. This is what we were created for. Saddle up yourself, we got a trail to blaze through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. Let's follow our leader into the glorious unknown. This is a life like no other. Whoa, this is a great adventure, and we'll travel over the mountains so high. We'll go through valleys so low, and still through it all, we'll find that this is the greatest journey that the human heart will ever see. The love of God, it will take us far beyond our wildest dreams. The saddle of yourself, we got a trail to blaze through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. Let's follow our leader into the glorious unknown. This is a life like no other. Whoa, this is a great adventure. Yeah, yeah, this is a great adventure. Thank you. Well, what an adventure it has been for all of us. Some of us, quite a longer adventure, especially getting to be, again, with grandparents here. And the stories that we could tell, right? And hopefully, as we've been encouraged, again, the stories that we must tell, that we should tell. It's very important. few years ago, I had the chance to write a book, memoirs, they called it, kind of my story. And it was an amazing process for me. It was, I was really scared at the beginning. Again, kind of like coming in here to speak. I'm not an author, write songs and sing songs, but I thought, I don't know if I'm going to remember, anything, the details, the things that should go in a book about my life story. It's kind of a blur. It's been amazing. It's been crazy, wonderful, hard. But as I started the process, it was amazing to begin to have those stories and those things kind of come back and to remember, to take the time to remember. Again, that's why I think it's so good. And you've got this day, and it's such a great encouragement. You've got this time together, this day, being here. Maybe you're going to go to lunch. You're going to hang out for a little bit with your family, with your kids, or maybe your grandparents and parents, and just to give some space and opportunity for story, because God shows up in our stories in really profound ways. And I began to realize that in my own life as I kind of looked back at my story, and I won't give you the details. I think last time I was with you a few years ago, I gave some of the details, and it's not a pitch at all for the book, but it is available, if interested. Places, wherever you get books. I don't even know. Normally I'd say in the lobby, you can pick up my book, but you can find it different places, wherever you get books. It's very long, and I'm sorry because I'm not speechless, it turns out. But it has a lot of pictures. So if you're like me and you just like the pictures, it got a lot of those too. But as I began to tell my story, I realized some things looking back and kind of going through my journey. And that's kind of some of what I want to share. And I did make some notes, so at least I would try to stay between the notes and a clock down here. I'll keep this short, but when I start trying to imagine, how it's been a long, amazing journey. Started in a little town called Paducah, Kentucky, not too far from here, Western Kentucky, and halfway. If you look for it on a map, you'll find it. As I like to tell people, halfway between Possum Trot and Monkey's Eyebrow. So that tells you everything you need to know about me. It's true. Those are the two towns. When I was a kid, I had my favorite T-shirt. I wore it all the time. I'd give anything to have it back, actually, still, because now it would be vintage and really cool. But it says I come from halfway between Possum Trot and Monkey's Eyebrow, and so that really is true where Paducah is. Started my journey writing, playing music, and just loving music, and had this amazing opportunity to get to start writing songs and move to Nashville, and just a journey that I never could have dreamed up, really. But what I began to realize as I look back at my story is, especially as a kid and then growing up, and why I even started writing music and making music, the kind of music that I did particularly, is because, and faith woven into my music is because as a kid, I saw the power of trusting God, following God's way for your life, especially in my family. Growing up in a family where my dad didn't have a father, would not have been a grandfather at grandfather's day. In my life as a kid on my dad's side, his father had sadly, alcohol consumed his life and took him away from the family when my dad was a baby. Never knew his dad. His dad died by the time my dad was 9. His father had passed away, literally died in a drunk tank in a jail somewhere. Just it was a very bad start of life for my dad. And met my mom, and as a little boy, I remember a lot of. Can y'all still hear me? Because I just went away in my. Okay, well, I'll just keep talking. But a lot of conflict, a lot of fighting and fussing. My mom was 16 when she and my dad got married. My brother came along very shortly after. So it was one of those, starting off very, very rough and rocky. I came in to my family at a point almost literally, as I would understand, looking back and hearing more and more of the story, kind of as a fixer right out of the gate, because my parents were really struggling, and the idea of let's try to have another child and maybe that will help save our marriage, which was about to fall apart. I came in, and that was kind of the assigned role. And And then when I was about 7 or 8 years old, really through, as only God could kind of orchestrate it, my family, my mom, who would take me and my brother to church every Sunday, because that's what you do in the buckle of the Bible belt on Sunday morning. But my dad was playing music and chasing a music dream, desire to someday make it to the Grand Ole Opry was his great dream and hope, as a very talented musician. But God really captured the heart of my dad and my mom and our entire family when I was about 7 years old, and brought us to faith in himself as a family. I then, a few months after seeing this change happening in my family, but especially in my home, when the fights and the arguments would start, my dad would stop and say, you know what, instead of slamming the door and leaving and driving out the driveway, my dad would stop and say, we need to pray. And I'd hear my dad talk to God. It wasn't anything fancy or particularly religious. My dad just said, God, I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to be a father, a husband, but you can show me. You can teach me. Hold my family together. And so I began to see the power of that, and really just a relationship with Jesus is what marked my life. We started singing together in church, making music and singing songs about the change God had made in our family. My dad would love the song, He Touched Me, Bill Gaither. My first song I learned was Folsom Prison Blues when I was 6 years old. So started out with prison songs, but then slowly we kind of worked our way into Bill Gaither. It was good. You mix it all in together, you know. But my dad would just cry. We'd sing that, shackled by a heavy burden, neath a load of guilt and shame. My dad had a lot of shame. And but then the hand of Jesus touched me. Now I'm no longer the same. And so it wasn't just music and a song. It was truth, life-changing truth in my family, and I saw it and experienced it. And so I began, playing music, singing songs. And as I would look back and realize then, throughout my life, there was this thing that kind of came to the surface, and it was basically that I was kind of born to be a fixer, and I want to fix things that are broken. And I realized I think that's a lot of reason I started even writing songs. Like this was something that in so many ways fixed so much that was broken in my life. Music brought my family together, and music about faith, about God's faithfulness. And so I wanted to write songs and encourage other people. But a strange thing happened as I look back at my life, and I began to realize that it was usually in the broken places where God showed up in the most powerful and profound ways. The things that I would have never scripted, the things that I would have never hoped for. Really, even from the beginning, it was my dad's story and the brokenness of all of that where God really showed up. It wasn't the way it was supposed to be, but it was the way that God took it and began to weave in His grace and His beauty into that brokenness. And I started to look back, and I started to say, if I could script it as a fixer, as a guy who likes it to work, and I want it to go well, and I want to do things right. I want to do it right. I would script all the stories so that pain and brokenness and heartache and the mess just didn't happen. But I started to look back at my story and my life, and I realized, starting when I met this beautiful young lady in Anderson, Indiana, at my mailbox. We shared a mailbox in Anderson College. Her name was Mary Beth Chapman. And therefore, we were in a mailbox together because we had the same last name. They assigned 2 students to a mailbox. She was quite lovely, and a friend of mine said, gosh, Chapman, you guys could be related. And I remember saying out loud, I really hope not, because she's quite, interesting to me, we'll see. And it's so interesting that I began to pursue her around campus everywhere I could. My kids now call it stalking, but I was pursuing her. And hiding behind trees, there she goes, And I finally got up courage. I asked her on a date. I had one shot, guys. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I did the best I could do in Anderson, Indiana. I took her to Red Lobster. Oh, yeah. That's it, And if you ever wonder, guys, is there a recipe for love? You really want to just sweep her off her feet? Cheese biscuits and popcorn shrimp. That's the combo right there. Do that, you got it. But I fell hopelessly in love with Mary Beth Chapman, shared a mailbox for a year. I asked her to share a mailbox with me forever. And she said yes, and that was 38 years ago now. We have shared life and mail and a mailbox together, and so I married a girl with the same last name. Some of you have heard me say it many times. I know that sounds weird, but I'm from Kentucky. It was not weird at all. This is kind of how it works. It's like, keep it in the family. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, that was the first place I started to create a lot of unfixable things in my life. Because it turns out, even though we had the same last name and everything was supposed to be perfect for us and go great, we were two very young, broken beyond what we had any idea, dragging all this baggage into a marriage. And she was 19, I was 21. It wasn't very long, into our marriage, like 6 or 7 months into our marriage. We were going to wait several years to have kids. God had other plans, we make our plans, God directs our steps, one of those great scriptures. Ours came by way of a puppy who ate my wife's medicine that she took to keep from having babies. The puppy never had babies, but it turns out just miss 1 or 2 of those. Things can happen. Anyway, so we're moving along here. That's keeping it family friendly. But we had our daughter, Emily, so we're off to the races. We're parents now, and my career starts up, and we're broken, and there's just a lot there that is not fixable. And yet, over and over again through my life, and some of you know the songs, I Will Be Here is one I wrote for my wife early on, when my mom and dad went through a divorce after amazing things in my journey with them as a heartbreak and pulled the rug out from under me. And yet this song came out of that, a song of commitment to my wife, and a journey that we have been on together now for 38 years, and we still don't have it figured out. And it's still a mess on any given day, and yet God has shown up in powerful ways, in amazing ways. Parenting, that's one that there's a whole lot that we just did wrong. In fact, we could write the book on all the things not to do, and yet watching God show up, even in the brokenness, even in the mess, in those places, because that's who he is. That's what he does. He is Redeemer, right, and Restorer. And even though I would have scripted so much differently, I think back the places, again, where I've experienced God. Prison, not that I went there forcibly. I went there willingly. That was good. That's a plus. We can mark that down. And I got to leave at the end of the day, so that's always good too. But I did get to make many visits into prisons, and death row with a man named Chuck Colson, that some of you all know, a dear friend until he passed away a few years ago. One of my dreams when I read his book was someday to go walk and stand in those places with that guy, and I got to do that. And I experienced God and the power of the gospel in the most profound ways, standing in a death row prison cell and seeing what the gospel can really do to free a heart. A very broken place, a broken story, and yet experience God there. I love that you got to hear from Kurt's mom, Phyllis, and an amazing story that I've known and been familiar with for years. Years ago, I got to go visit a very similar story with Jim Elliott and 5 missionaries that went into the jungles of Ecuador to try to reach a tribe there, the Waodani tribe. And those 5 men were martyred and killed. I had the privilege of going to be in the jungle several times with that tribe and take that story to listeners to my music on tour years ago. An incredibly broken story, and you've heard it again. Not a way that it should have been, right? To script it the way we would have it go. And yet you see God, I love that phrase, says you see God put skin on, becomes so real in these places, and yet they're broken. It's not how it's supposed to be. It's not how we would have wanted it to be if we could have it fixed and go the way we would plan for it to. My wife and I, a lot of you know the story, and a lot of you share in this great joy with us in the story of adoption. Our daughter Emily was 11, went to Haiti and came home and said, "Mom and Dad, there are kids in the world without a family. I know what we need to do about that. We need to adopt some of these children, bring them into our home." And some of you, again, know I always tell the story that we said that's a wonderful thing you should do when you grow up and have your own home. But we got 3 and we can't handle the 3 we got. That's not going to happen. And as the story would go, we would adopt Shoei and Stevie Joy and Maria and some of you sitting in this room walk through that journey with us. And some even in this school, Jim Chapman, that a lot of you know, talking about a mess. That's my brother-in-law. That's my wife, Mary Beth's brother. So again, that's my brother-in-law, Chapman. Again, I know it's very confusing. Don't ask, just go with it, okay? Again, just go Kentucky. Yeah, that's right. That's it. But that's, and you know Jim's story, and you know 3 of the beautiful bright lights that have walked the halls that are my nieces. Lydia, who's getting ready to graduate, and Fallon and Izzy, who are amazing parts of our story that came to our family and to this family and many others that I'm looking around and seeing, and I know that have been a part of this family. Beautiful, beautiful stories that were born out of great heartache and brokenness that actually isn't even all fixed, even because of the story. They carry, and these stories carry ache and pain and loss, even through their life. And yet, God shows up in those stories in an amazing way. The ultimate unfixable, many of you know, for us and our story, if I were to call these things the unfixable things in our life and our stories, is May of 2008, when our youngest daughter, Maria, passed away. A tragic day at our home that took the life of our youngest daughter and left us with just shredded hearts and faith and grief and lots of shrapnel that doesn't ever go away. And again, I look around the room, I see dear friends who've walked that same journey, loss of a precious daughter and a child, and we all carry grief and loss and ache that doesn't go away, but will one day if God's word is true and his promises. But he shows up in this mess, in the brokenness, and if we'll allow him, if we'll trust him, we'll not waste anything, any part of that. And I guess that's the thing that I started to say, I've come to understand. I haven't come to understand much of anything. I am learning to understand it, that I would pass on to you, young men and women, all of you, young men and women in this room, even the grandparents that are young men and women, and then the students here as well. My experience is this, that God really is good and he is faithful, that life is hard and gonna bring heartache and heartbreak, and Jesus said it, in this world you will have trouble. I've been reading the story. I'm confessing something here. Please just don't tell anybody this outside this room, because this is not a good thing. I am trying again for the 437th time, I think, to read through the entire Bible in a year. And I should have done that a long time ago, and I can see some of you making notes now. Go burn all Stephen Curtis Chapman CDs. He's never read through the whole Bible. So in a year, but I'm going after it again. I'm telling you, I get to the begats. It's like you don't need melatonin or any of that stuff to help you sleep. You start getting into that, I'm out. So I gotta go in again. But I'm in Genesis reading the story of Joseph. And again, just being so, hit by this reality again that this story, you watch it and you read it and it's a mess. Man, the Old Testament, there was a mess. That's the part that encourages me the most when I do read it. It's like, wow, if they can, all this, craziness going on, God can show up and bless and tell these incredible stories for his glory. That's really good news. That's really encouraging, because there was just so much of a mess in the lives of so many of these people that God chose and blessed and showed up in the story. But Joseph, and his brothers sold him, into slavery. He ends up, in Potiphar's house, kind of has, it looks like the story's going to go up, and then, Potiphar's wife starts putting the moves on him, and he runs out, and that blows up. He ends up in prison because of a lie, against him. And, you follow the story, he ends up then in, the second in command, and Pharaoh, gives him all this power because he interprets these dreams while he's in prison. I mean, it's just, all these broken parts of the story, and yet this amazing story that God is telling even through all of that. And I love that verse that finally says, and I put it down because I love the way the Message says it. It says, "Don't you see, you planned evil against me, but God used those very same plans for my good." Another version says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." And that is who our God is. It's the very same things so often. Grab a guitar, hold it. The very same things that are the most broken. And I don't know what you're carrying, some of you still in your story, and you're thinking, that part, there's no way God can redeem that or restore that. I just got to keep that part tucked away. Or maybe it's yet to come for some of you. Or maybe you're carrying a whole lot of that with you. I am completely convinced that who our God is, and I'm being reminded of it over and over again, even as I'm reading it in the stories that he gives us. But I've lived it, and I know there'd be a huge amen if all of us could say it out loud right now to this, that it's the very things, the broken parts of our story, because of who God is, he's not going to waste any of it. He's not going to sweep any of it out the door and go, well, I don't know what that was. Well, that was a mess, let's just try to get rid of that. If God really is who he says he is, he's a God who says, I am working all things together for good. That's not a Bible magnet for your refrigerator or a bumper sticker. That is a truth that is the reason that I am standing here, still breathing, still alive by the grace of God, still married. It's because I really believe that's true. That's how good our God is, that he is really a redeemer, that he is one who will take all of the broken parts. If he says, I'm working all things together for good, then it's the most shameful, it's the most painful part of our stories and our journey that he is using and working together for his glory and for our good, if we'll trust him. So that's my encouragement to you, my hope that you will lean fully into and on the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God in your story, because he is faithful and true. As I look back on this road I've traveled, I see so many times he's carried me through. And if there's one thing that I've learned in my life, my Redeemer is faithful and true. My Redeemer is faithful and true. And everything he has said he will do. And every morning his mercies are new. My Redeemer is faithful and true. And in every situation he has proved his love for me. When I lack the understanding, he gives more grace to me. My Redeemer is faithful and true. And everything he has said he will do. And every morning his mercies are new. Redeemer's faithful and true. Jesus is faithful and true. Amen. Thank y'all so much. God bless you, Brentwood Academy.